Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast, coming at you from a random house in Dalton, Georgia. We're here for the Mobile Hunters Expo, and this is a good opportunity to do some podcasts with some people in person who we wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to do that with. And today, we're interviewing our buddy Greg Maher of Meadow Creek Mounts, all about early season feed trees. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Jacob, how you doing over there?
I'm doing better now. Doing way better now. So
Yeah.
It's been a long day, man.
I just totally cut you off.
A long day, and you just got here, so.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, no. I just got here.
Yeah.
I know, I just rolled
All
up.
kinds of stuff. But no, I'm excited for this conversation because, Greg, you shared hunting camp with us last year in December on a hunt. And that's when I think I kind of realized you were talking more about the feed tree aspect. And that's something personally I've struggled with in the past. I've shot some does over them. Very little success getting on bucks specifically on feed trees. But I think you were mentioning specifically when we were in hunting camp that feed trees is something that you've killed like some of your biggest bucks on, right?
That's right. Most of my deer, honestly. So I've started out doing that when I was a kid a little bit, and then got more into it in college, targeting specific trees instead of just a big general area that has a lot of white oaks. So be glad to go through that with you.
Could you talk about real quick, like the area of the country you're from? Because I know you live in South Carolina now, but is that where that you cut your teeth specifically doing the feed tree hunting?
Yep, South Carolina and Georgia. I grew up in the upstate of South Carolina and then hunted northeast Georgia. It's pretty much where most of it took place.
Same area as old Rick Cope.
Yeah.
Episode 510, is that right?
Yeah, episode 510. Go listen to it.
Yeah,
He's in Low Country, South Carolina?
No, he's upstate, but he's further east than you.
Okay.
So he's still up there, kind of bouncing from North Carolina, South Carolina, lives in South Carolina.
Okay.
And just another real popular feed tree guest. So the question is, when we talk about feed trees, we've had a lot of conversations on it, but a lot of the guys we've had on about feed trees have come from Arkansas. Yeah. And they're hunting these gigantic river bottoms. And for a lot of us that live like where we live in Alabama, our feed trees are more like at SMZs, small creek drainages. Like we don't have like the big river bottoms. Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about like the areas that you've hunted for feed trees in, and like where maybe you cut your teeth on it, but like maybe the diversity of areas that you'll hunt feed trees in?
Yeah, so mostly it was it wasn't big river bottoms, but it was along lakes, rivers, ponds, stuff like that. And what I like to look for is not just a huge, vast expanse of hardwoods. I like to be able to maybe be in a strip between a lake and a pine thicket where you can, and it could be anywhere from 80 to 200 yards wide, but if you can see that whole area, because a lot of times they come in and they still browse. Yeah, there's specific trees they like to go to, but you might hunt and they go feed on a tree that's 50 or 60 yards away that you maybe didn't check or didn't look as good as you thought. So I like to look for those areas before I even scout that I know I'm going to be able to see across a whole strip of hardwoods.
So it's a little bit different from how other guys we have on the podcast talking about getting that tighter security cover. It's like you're out in the area where you can see a little bit more, but does cover play a factor for you?
Oh yeah, because a lot of times the best trees are right on the edge of that cover, because most of it is pine thickets up above it that might be 10, 12, 15 feet high that are getting thick in the understory, and then it just depends on where the best tree is. So a lot of times the best ones do tend to be closer to that.
So let me kind of bring this up because I want you to kind of explain this for the listeners to give us a better idea of what we're about to get into. If you had to summarize your strategy when it comes from an access standpoint and how you hunt, how would you go about describing your hunting style for when it comes to feed trees?
Okay, so mainly it's a lot of scouting to find the hot tree of the day or of the week, because they only, they'll start dropping those green acorns at first. So it's just finding that best one that there's a lot of sign on. Access is very important, slipping in, slipping out. We have one spot that there's a creek bank that's probably 10 to 12 feet high, and you walk up the creek to get past a lot of area where deer might be already feeding in the mornings, to get past that to get to the tree you need to be in. And we've killed 2 bucks in this one spot that we definitely probably would have walked by if we had not been down in the creek and walking up the creek. And 30 minutes after daylight, here they come back from the area we'd come from. So,
Andrew, did you catch that?
I think so.
Hunting mornings for feed
most of my big deer were killed in the mornings on feed trees.
Oh, that's
another
different.
thing I was going to get to.
Yeah, that's super different.
Yep.
You say that's different, but for Southern guys, I really don't think it is.
Yeah, but if you were to analyze a lot of our feed tree conversations in the past, like the guys come to mind, like especially like Jonathan Moreland, and then Richard Fott, a lot of their success was like that midday afternoon time period and kind of scouting for those trees in the morning.
Yeah, definitely. But most of the guys outside of them are they hunt in the morning. Because like the whole don't hunt in the morning thing, I feel like is more of a Midwestern
Yeah.
thing.
So I have actually scouted my way in and found a feed tree in the dark, climbed up and killed maybe my biggest or second biggest in South Carolina, doing that like an hour after daylight. There were 3 or 4 small bucks that came in first, and of course I was just waiting on a big one. And yeah, I knew the area though. Knew I'd hunted that little patch before. So it was, one of the first or second places I checked that morning on the way in. I was like, yeah, that's where I need to be.
Well, while we're on the conversation, let's stick on this morning hunting because this is something that, again, I think in general media, like Andrew, that is a good point. Like we have had other guys on, and just know other guys that hunt features that do have success in the mornings, like Scott Seals, great example. But when you're talking about morning hunting, is that something that you're specifically going to areas that you have previously scouted? You're not walking to a new area on a morning hunt, and you're kind of working your way back to trees that you have found in the past. And
most of the time, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And what specific setup? If you're talking about like hunting morning for feed trees and your access and everything, how are you working on getting into an area? And why do some areas look at maybe in your perspective as more of a morning spot for feed trees versus maybe afternoon spots?
Yeah. So. I have hunted some tree, so sometimes it's hard to figure that out, and sometimes you have to hunt and figure it out. We have areas where you can go hunt in the evening and see 1, 2 deer, maybe never see a buck, and then the next morning, well, I'll just go back and tell the whole story. So hunted this area, saw 10 bucks one morning, 10 rack bucks, anything, something bigger than like a 6, 8 point, passed them all up, hunted that evening, saw like 2 deer. Like, all right, well, what's going on? Next morning, I killed a nice buck. The next week, my buddy killed a nice buck 200 yards from there, and then that next week, I killed another big one. So it's one of those things where we just don't even go evenings anymore because we've done the sits. And it doesn't look any different than anywhere else. There's a pine thicket on one top, a pine thicket on the other, and it's really just an SMZ between them, which is a term that I didn't learn until I started listening to you guys.
What'd you call it before?
Hardwood draw, but well, I mean, there's different, I don't know. Probably just hardwoods.
Yeah.
Didn't really distinguish between different types,
Yeah. But before we get too off in the weeds here, because we're going really fast.
Yeah.
How did you grow up doing this? Like, how did you learn how to do it? And I just want to caveat by saying that, like, when I was growing up, everyone's like, oh, you go find a white oak dropping, like that's ice cream to a deer. I didn't actually know anyone who did it, though. Because everyone I grew up around was gun hunters. Yeah. And I guess you can do it in our gun season, which starts the Saturday before Thanksgiving in Alabama. But it's really a bow season thing specifically for a lot of people. And I just didn't know anybody who did that. And when I started bow hunting and tried to go out and find some feed trees, I'm like, oh, wow, I don't know what I'm doing, like at all. And it didn't work for me for a really long time. So how did you get started with it?
So I got started probably similar to the way you did. People say that, and you go hunt, and there's acorns everywhere. It's like, well, but that's the tree that deer aren't eating if they're everywhere. So I think that's probably
that's a good point. We're coming back to that.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that probably hangs people up. They're like, I hear people talk about it all the time. Oh, hunting this area, there's acorns raining everywhere. They're all over the ground. It's like that's not necessarily a good thing if they're on the ground. They haven't been eaten yet. So yeah, I grew up doing that. We would see deer. We had some good spots. We would see deer. But once I got into college, started hunting more with my buddy whose dad had been hunting feed trees a lot longer than I had, and it was more about specific targeting that specific tree. So it was kind of a learning curve. There was a lot of time in there. We were just climbing up in hardwoods where there was acorns and hoping one walked by. But once you start finding those specific hot trees, it changes a lot. It's a lot more consistent. I've taken people before, and I tell them before we go, it's like, there's a 90% chance you're going to get a shot at a deer this evening. That might not be a buck. It might be 2 does might come in. But there's like 2 weeks in October in South Carolina, Georgia, where white oaks are perfect. And, yeah, it's every evening, every morning, there'll be a deer there pretty much.
Yeah, we're going to get into probably the habitat and terrain aspect of this later, but to start out, I really want to talk more about the sign reading.
Okay.
Because it's so you have to be good at reading sign and understand what you're looking at. You brought up an excellent point, is like if you walk beneath this oak tree and there's so many acorns underneath it that you're like, I'm gonna fall and sprain my ankle. Yeah, like you slipping on all of them.
Yeah, that's not good.
Like in the past, man, I'd be walking up, I'd be like, look at all this.
Yeah.
This is where we're hunting tonight, and then never see anything.
Yeah. Some of the best trees I've hunted, you walk under and you're trying to find them, but you get there, it's all mulched up. So Same thing with droppings. Droppings is one of those things. It's like they can be everywhere, or it might, and I think it might have to do with if it's the trees that the deer go to first, or if they've been milling around for a while and maybe they don't leave as many droppings. But I've killed a lot of deer on tore up white oaks that have hardly any droppings under them. So yeah, reading the signs big. Look for the mulched up. It doesn't look like turkey scratching. It doesn't look like, it might look like hogs, but you can kind of see the individual prints. The leaves are turned over. If it's rained within the last day or two, of course, that makes it to where all that old sign's washed away, but you can see the leaves mulched up, broken up. Looking for the acorn caps on the ground, notched caps, or just kind of broken up acorns that the hole is still there from where they've busted it open.
Talk about the notched cap thing.
Well, I just usually look for caps in general. I've heard about the notched cap thing. A lot of times, though, squirrels will cut acorns out, so they might have messed with it. That's another thing to look for when you're trying to find a tree, is look for one that's dropping or look for one that squirrels are up in cutting out. So the notched cap thing's new to me. Or it's not new to me, but it's something that I've looked at in the past. And been like,
it's just like there'll be a little cap, and there's like literally just a little notch taken out of it. Like you got your fingernail and just like pinched a little part of it off.
Yeah, I just look for the caps in general.
Okay.
All right, so you were talking about when it rains, it washes away a lot of that sign. Can you explain what you mean by that?
It just means like the leaves that were mulched up or lofted up are no longer, don't look like that. You walk under a feed tree that yesterday was like mutilated, and you go back after it's rained, it just looks different. It was kind of laid down instead of being. It's not necessarily like the droppings are washed away or the caps are washed away. It's more just the mulched leaves are kind of harder to tell that there's been deer there. But you go like 2 hours after rain and it looks fresh, you're like, oh, they were just in here. So that can be a good indicator that they've been there recently.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you rake something up in your yard.
Yep.
You know what it looks like. That's the easiest example. It's like what it looks like right then versus what it looks like in 2 days.
Yep.
You know, like the leaves settle back down a little bit, and in the like the really fresh sign, the underside of the leaves are still wet and whatnot. Yep. When you see that, you're like, oh yeah.
It's a hard thing to just explain. Hopefully we get a chance this fall to hunt together, and I can. Well, I'm sure you've seen it, but. Sometimes you'll be walking with somebody that kind of thinks they know what they're looking for, and they walk right past a tree and they don't notice it. But you really get to looking at the details that you can find the trees that, and it might be a tree that there's not 4 or 5 does coming to every day. It might be a tree that you just know there's some buck sign around. This tree's being fed on. Those are sometimes some good trees.
Yeah, another thing that you hear a lot, especially in pine country, whether it be Alabama, Georgia, or South Carolina, is we'll interview the guys like Richard from Arkansas or Jonathan who hunt these big river bottoms, and they're like feed tree specialists. Is what they do. And sometimes we'll put out those episodes and we'll have people comment on them or whatever, and they'll be like, well, that just doesn't work here. Like, you just don't find that here. Right. And I used to think that too about the area, because some of the people I know, and I hunt the same places as them, and I used to think it too. And I was telling Jacob this the other day. I'm like, actually, it was just me not walking enough. Like, I straight up just was not scouting enough.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just expect to walk into a 5-acre patch of hardwoods and there be a feed tree there. That's just not how it works. I mean, there's a lot of, and it's timing too. Of course, the red oaks usually start first where we are, and then the white oaks. Later season, you might have some water oaks or something like that. But early season, it's going to be red oaks, and then transitioning to my favorite period, which is white oaks, which is usually late October for us.
Yeah, I mean, would it be safe to say that like anywhere that feed trees exist, anywhere that like acorn producing oaks are, you can find a hot feed tree and hunt it?
You could, yeah.
I mean, because I don't see a reason why one area just like you couldn't hunt feed trees in one area if they exist there.
No, if they exist there, unless it's. The only reason would be if there's just too many, and yeah, the deer feeding on them, but they have 100 options this week instead of 10 on a year when there's not many. So
yeah,
it would be harder to narrow them down.
So in pine country, it ought to be even better.
Yeah,
because all you got is SMZs.
SMZs, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yep. So
while we're on the sign, I want to stay on the sign topic for a little bit.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, we talked about like the feed sign and kind of like what that looks like, and some long-term listeners or long-time listeners have probably heard similar conversations about that. The other thing that I'm interested in is the association. If you're trying to target a buck early season, what kind of buck sign do you want to see around it? What is the age of that sign? How are you trying to age the sign? And based off what you're seeing tells you there's probably a buck here I might be interested in hunting.
So rubs, I just call them horn bushes. Most people just call them rubs or whatever. So a lot of those fresh under the tree. I don't necessarily look for a lot of scrapes that time of year, but yeah, if you have a hot scrape that still has piss in it, then that's gonna be good too. But most of the bucks I've killed under feed trees came in after does. Whether it was starting in that seeking phase, because a lot of the areas we hunt, the rut's the last week of October. So you've got feed trees like starting October 15th and hunting those for a couple weeks, and then the rut starting like October 20th, 25th in some areas, or the first week of November. It kind of lines up perfectly for hunting them in those areas. So, but yeah, just looking for buck sign in general, and maybe just in the area. It doesn't have to be directly under the tree, but most of the hot trees will have rubs right under them, and then you can find them later in the season while you're turkey hunting. You're like, oh yeah, this is the white oak they were feeding on last year.
Now, with the buck sign, are you looking for a certain size sign, or are you just looking for buck sign general?
Just fresh rubs. I mean,
whether it's the size of your index finger.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't get too excited about a bunch that are size of my pinky. But everyone wants to see that big rub. So whether there's much science behind that, have you guys done any digging into any of that as far as rub sizes? Or
I mean, we've discussed in the podcast, and some guests have different theories about size of rubs. And also, like early season, you find a lot of whip rubs where these bucks are breaking off these saplings that might be as big as around your thumb, and that always gets me excited, especially if it's like you can see it's all twisted up, or especially the ones that they're not even broken, but they're just all twisted and gnarled up, and it's just like laying there. You're like, okay, that's good. So that's a big factor for you. I kind of talked about the scrapes. Is there anything else specifically on the sign that is important to pay attention to? Like, is there anything maybe outside the deer sign? I mean, do you have hogs in the area or anything else? So like, how do you differentiate like the hogs other than having hog droppings underneath it?
Basically it's the droppings, and then they do a lot of those rubs with the mud rubs. So if you find a tree that hogs have found, not saying you're not going to kill anything on it, but you're basically hog hunting at that point, that tree. We just usually move on, try to find something else.
Okay, interesting. Because I mean, that's something I think a lot of listeners can relate with, that are in areas with hogs. Like, we hunt some areas that have hogs in it, and that's probably what I could imagine is like the most frustrating thing. Is you get pigs coming to the area, they're laying down a ton of feed sign, but it's like, from everybody we talked to, like what you're saying, if you have pigs actively in that area, there's a good chance you're probably not going to see a deer or a buck specifically using that tree. Yeah,
I mean, because the hogs are going to come in at the same time you're trying to kill a deer. Right at dusk, right at dawn. And we've witnessed, and this is probably area dependent and hog density dependent, but we've witnessed, like on a food plot, for instance, if there's a hog, those deer know when that hog, before you hear that hog coming, those deer are already looking that way, and as soon as it steps out, they are gone. So you don't want to be hunting a feed tree with a bunch of hogs under it. I can't think of any times that I've ever been hunting a feed tree and then had a deer just kind of hang out and wait till they left and come back or anything like that. They usually run them. They don't want to be anywhere near the hogs.
So Jonathan Moreland has said the same thing in Arkansas. Like, if hogs move in, the deer move out. And also another thing he deals with there is black bears. So if like a black bear comes to a feed tree, especially, I think he gave examples more so like with persimmons early season. If a black bear's on a persimmon tree, just kiss that tree goodbye. It's not leaving until all the persimmons are gone, and like the deer aren't going to come back to that area.
Yeah. Well, we have don't have to deal with that. Well, there are bears, but we're we hunt the foothills and then on down in the Piedmont region. Not necessarily way up in the mountains, but there are bears near us on occasion, but it's never been an effect for us.
Is there anything else in the sign aspect that's worth noting?
So not really, just hunting that fresh sign, giving it a few sits. But so what I like to do is, because there's some days you might scout and never find the feed tree. There's some days you might be trying to figure out which one to go to. I just like to go to the ones that have the most rubs under it, the fresh rubs, and then just the less, kind of stand there and listen to how many acorns drop. Sometimes, some afternoons, and this will be on a whole hunt, 200 or 300 might fall out of the tree. Well, if you were looking and scouting and you only saw like 10 or 15, 20 or 30 on the ground, you know that they're really eating them. So when you're scouting and trying to figure out which tree you're going to stand there for 5 minutes, don't stand directly under the tree, but just listen to kind of how many it's dropping that day.
That's a good point.
You kind of get an idea of how many should be on the ground and how few you're seeing. Because once they start to mulch up the ground, it's not like you can tell, oh yeah, there's been 10 more deer here since yesterday. That's not really ever a thing.
Oh man, doing a little bit of acorn math.
Oh
I
yeah,
like
you
it.
got to. Oh, But I mean, it kind of depends on the wind blowing and listen for squirrels cutting them out. Squirrels are big, usually early season. Of course, once they start to drop, then it's hard to distinguish squirrels cutting them out. But that's the first thing you'll find is squirrels cutting them.
I was going to ask about when they very, very first start dropping, where it's like that transition week where they're kind of dropping, but not really, and you're like, man, they're right on the edge, and you start finding little green acorns all over the place.
Yep.
What's your take on that? Do you get fired up about seeing those, like they're eating them, or
as
what?
As long as there wasn't like a storm that blew through yesterday and just blew them out. But yeah, they'll eat them when they're green like that and start to, because then you'll start finding them, they're like halfway brown and then they're fully. But yeah, they'll start eating them when they're green.
Okay.
I mean, they're just as excited as we are when the acorns start dropping.
So I want to talk about getting to the scouting conversation,
Okay.
because scouting for feed trees is something, again, Andrew brought up earlier, something that we both have probably just failed on, probably didn't do the best job. Like I've found feed trees, and now looking back at it, it's almost like I kind of just lucked into it. Like I was going back to an area because it had maybe good habitat edges, and then like while I'm in there, I'm like, oh, this tree's pretty good. Like that one hunt we had in Arkansas where we saw those deer, and I shot that dinky little doe.
Yeah.
And had turkeys come through the whole 9 yards. And
Oh, no, that's Tennessee, not Arkansas.
Oh, sorry, Tennessee. Yeah, not Arkansas. But that was something, like I just went in there. We just went in there, and I was like, this looks pretty good. I can't remember if I'd been there before you came. I don't think so.
I don't know. We found it on the map, and yeah, it wasn't even that far from the parking area either. And I think we might have found it with our ears. Like we heard it dropping up there.
When we got in that bottom.
Yeah, because there wasn't a lot of oaks. It was kind of a river bottom, and you get down in those bottoms, and at least in that part of Tennessee, and there was a lot of box elders down in the bottom, and we couldn't find any white oaks anywhere. And there's this little ridge we were working towards, and we heard them dropping up there.
Yeah. That's a big thing, especially if you're weaving through, and then you come to an area that there's like, there's white oaks everywhere, and because you can hear them drop 100, 150 yards away if it's real calm. So just stand there. Did that just scare you?
Scared the crap out of me. I was like, what just happened, dude?
So
that was
why
so
are you
loud.
so jumpy?
Dude, that was so loud.
So yeah, you might stand there for 5 or 10 minutes without even moving, just knowing that you're listening, because sometimes it becomes overwhelming to check every tree, and a lot of times you can skirt like 15 or 20 yards, like peeking up, like it doesn't look tore up over there. So you don't necessarily have to. Once you figure out what you're looking for, you don't necessarily have to walk underneath every tree, because when you find a hot one, man, you're tiptoeing out of there. You're like, I wish I wasn't standing right where I am right now. So like, get out of here before there's too much scent.
So let me ask you this: we're talking about the scouting aspect, because I found this quite a bit. Where like you find like a group of oaks that you want to go check out, and while you're in there, you're looking at them, and you start finding some trees that have droppings underneath them, but the ground's not tore up.
Yeah.
Like it's not like that mulched look you're talking about. Do you take that as they're just kind of transitioning? They might not be feeding hard on that tree, or like, or they're just picking them off the ground without digging for them. Like, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not hunting that tree just because of the droppings for sure.
Okay.
I'm looking more for the mulched up and the busted up the caps and the broken holes and stuff like that.
So walk us through like your scouting regiment. Like how soon do you start scouting, and then how do you try to break down an area? I mean, are you zigzagging? You're just going from specific points on the map. Like kind of walk us through on the e-scouting scene.
So you mean like how soon in the season?
How soon in the season, but also from an e-scouting standpoint, before you actually get in the field, what are you doing? So how soon, and then how you use e-scouting?
So e-scouting, kind of like I touched on earlier, I'm looking for areas that are like a thin street. It might be miles long, between a river and some pines or something, where you can see kind of all the way across it, instead of just being where there could be a deer 360 degrees around you. I like being up against a pond or a lake or something. Another reason for that is the wind. A lot of times it'll suck down onto that pond, and your scent might be just blowing 15 yards behind you, and there's not a deer that's going to come across the pond to you.
Mm-hmm.
It could swim across the pond, but so that's what I look for when e-scouting, is places like that where there's hardwoods next to water, next to pines. And then as far as the actual scouting, I mean, we pretty much start hunting the beginning of the season, whether it's muscadines. That's another thing I wanted to hit on. That's a good thing for the first week. I have not heard very many people talk about. So it's very similar to scouting for feed trees. You're not going to find a tree that's just mutilated under it, because there's usually not a muscadine vine with hundreds of them on it. But we hunt them the same way as feed trees. They drop, the deer come eat them like candy. So,
when do y'all open again?
Georgia is the second Saturday in September.
Oh, okay.
So it's early.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got like a week of muscadine hunting.
Okay. Yeah, because we've hunted Georgia before, and I think we were there opening week last year, and none of the oaks were really doing it yet, except the mountain oaks.
Yep.
And there were deer feeding on them, but we were trying to find a persimmon or like a muscadine vine or something. At least I was.
Yeah. So then the scouting for white oaks kind of begins when season opens more. You can look up if you have a historical spot, it becomes you get excited about certain trees. Like I've got trees that I hunted 20 years ago that's like, man, I go check it every year. You might just go check it with binoculars and see if it's going to have any. So that scouting starts then when you're in the woods looking for red oaks, because you've got a couple weeks of red oaks before the white oaks start. We've got some. These historical trees, we have some white oaks that opening weekend of bow season, they're already dropping or starting to. And then you've got some that don't drop to the end of October. So whether that's a regional difference or just a specific tree, once you've kind of established these areas, that's little spots you can go back and check. It's not like every time I hunt a feed tree, it's something somewhere I've never been before. A lot of times it's, oh yeah, I hunted that one 2 or 3 years ago. Let's go check it. Oh yeah, it's good again. I saw this many deer. It should be good. So a lot of that scouting just kind of starts the beginning of the season, being in the woods every week, knowing that once that first acorn drops, you're on top of it.
So you're not like scouting like late summer or anything. You're waiting to really go look until around when season opens and throughout pretty much the whole bow season.
Yeah, and the reason is you can have 1 million acorns in the woods, but they're only going to feed on the specific tree. So if you don't know of a certain tree is going to be good, then being there in the summer and just looking up and saying, oh, there's a bunch of acorns in this area. Yeah, it might be a place to come back and check, but those specific trees are the ones you're going to kill the deer on, the ones that they're liking to feed on. So I don't really do any summer scouting for acorns unless I'm just kind of wanting to have a wild hair and want to go check a new area.
Now, when you're scouting, I do want to talk about, you mentioned e-scouting. You like to be around water. Is your same thought process there along like a decent sized creek? Maybe not a creek you take a boat up, but like it's a creek that maybe you'd have to wade across or maybe even swim.
Not really a lot of times those are thicker areas anyway that the deer may come from. So if it's just a small creek or one you might have to wade across, that could just be kind of like, look at it as it being a thicket or just a place the deer could be browsing in, eating the green stuff, and they'll pop out of that to come into the hardwoods. But I like to be where I can see all the way across the hardwoods that I'm hunting.
And then are you just walking like a straight line through that, or are you zigzagging?
Oh, you're zigzagging, and only looking for white oaks. I mean, red oaks, I've killed some deer on red oaks. They're just the deer love the white oaks. So I'm just kind of bouncing like, oh, there's one. Let's go check it. There's one. You get in it, like I said, if you get in an area where there's a bunch, just stand there and listen for 5 minutes.
And as you're kind of zigzagging your way through, you're looking for the tilt up at ground. Like how far? I know you have a trained eye for it because you've been doing it for so long, but how far can you typically pick up on it if you have a good visual and you can see?
I mean, you still need to be 15 yards 20 yards, but a lot of times you still want to go check right under the tree and just look around, see how many, because you're not going to be able to see how many brown acorns are laying on the ground. I'm colorblind, so I definitely can't see it laying on the ground 15 yards away. So that's more. It's more for if you're trying to speed scout through an area, looking and saying, "Oh yeah, nothing's tilled up the ground over there." But once you kind of see it, then you go check it out and say, "Yeah, it looks like there's a lot of dropping here. They're obviously feeding on it." So
do you have any?
It's kind of a zigzag and stand back if you can. Yeah.
Do you have any criteria for like how far you want to be away from a thicket?
Not really. I mean, I've killed them on. There's sometimes a white oak right on the edge of it, or I've killed them like. So, like I said, I like to be able to see across, but that doesn't mean that this is necessarily a thicket up here. It could be tall pines or tall pines here, and there might not be a thicket within 400 or 500 yards. So, not really. It's just kind of whatever the sign tells you is the hot tree. That's kind of the one to be on, and it takes a few sits sometimes. Like I was telling you about when I saw those like 10 bucks one morning, and then the next morning killed a nice one. Sometimes you just got to sit there and give it a few days. I don't bounce around. If there's a hot feed tree, I know eventually he's going to be in there.
Yeah, one thing with all this GPS data that we've been, talking to Dr. Bronson Strickland about, and then also the Auburn stuff that we were looking at, it kind of reminds me of what you said earlier about there's some trees that they're stopping at, and they're grabbing a quick bite and then going, and then there's other trees that they stay at for a long time, and you can see that in that data where they'll like kind of make their way through some spots, and then all of a sudden they get in this one area and they're there for a long time. And I tend to think those are probably like nighttime for the most part. and maybe further from cover. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but there are times where you can kind of see that. If you can see a long ways, they might stop at that tree, stop at that tree. But when you're on the good one, they come in, and that's one thing I was wanting to get to later is don't rush the shot. When they come to a feed tree, they're gonna make laps around it, eat. So it's not like, I mean, yeah, if it's the buck of a lifetime, take the very first shot you have, but you don't have to get in any kind of hurry.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
But as far as how far they are from cover, I think that might have to do with the like the droppings at certain trees. They might spend less time at that first one just because that's the first one they come to when they get up. That might be where a lot of the droppings are. And then they come to your tree, they might spend an hour there, and there's like hardly any droppings. So sometimes it seems random, and sometimes it seems like you know what you're doing. So it's hard to answer that question as far as them stopping at them and then coming to your tree. But that's another thing to take note of when you see deer hanging out in an area for 20 or 30 minutes, and then they might leave. They might not come to your tree that day. Always go check out what they were up to up there.
Yeah. Now, I got one buck in particular that was on that Auburn GPS data that was next to a lake, and there's like a slough that came up off of that lake, and there was, I think, 2 different deer that would, I mean, dude, they go get right at the tip of that slough, and they would get there at dark, and they would be there like all night. And then they go somewhere else, when the morning came. But they would cycle through there every couple of days, and every time they got to that spot, they were there for a very long time. And almost like, I wonder what that looks like down in there. Yeah. Just from a sign standpoint, it's got to be wild,
I'm sure it is, yeah.
And that kind of begs the question, too, of, and this is one reason I asked about the cover, is how do you know that you're in daytime activity, daytime sign?
Yeah, it's hard. It could be hard to tell, but a lot of times those bucks get up and they've been moving for 30 minutes before dark. I guess you hope you're at the tree where the does are because they're coming to start to search. And trail camera data can sometimes, we have put trail cameras on feed trees. We don't do it a lot because you don't really want to scare a buck that's coming to that tree every night. But yeah, distinguishing between the nighttime and the daytime is something you just have to do with the sits. Just sometimes it's hard to tell.
I'm curious. I'm kind of getting more into the scouting. If you're scouting in season, you've kind of talked about like what kind of sign you're looking for in order for you to feel confident setting up on it. Walk us through how do you pick a tree to climb based off wind, and what are you trying to shoot? Are you trying to shoot directly under that tree, or are you trying to get 30, 40 yards from the tree where you're maybe not shooting to the far side of the canopy? Like, how do you like to set up, especially with the wind and picking the right tree?
Yeah, I'm always setting up to be able to shoot the entire underneath of that canopy. So, you figure basically a 10 or 15 yard circle around the base of that tree. Just trying to find a tree that's 15 or 20 yards away. I don't want to be where I'm having to fling one or hope one walks by me on the way to or leaving the tree. If I'm hunting a feed tree, I'm hunting the feed tree. You don't want to get in the feed tree unless that's your only option. Of course, I'm a climber guy, or I have been. I'm getting more into some of you knew that.
We're here at the Mobile Hunters Expo. Well, going to convert him.
So, I mean, the areas I hunt have always just set up. There's so many poplars to get in. There's so many. I'll get in a poplar or white oak, pine tree. But yeah, I want to be up where I can shoot most of the canopy under that tree. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be 40 yards away.
Okay. So that's something I've always been curious with, because I've heard guys, again, doing both. Sitting right under, like getting as close to the canopy as possible, underneath the canopy, shooting the whole thing. I've had some guys talk about kind of getting downwind of it a little bit, thinking a buck's going to kind of swing into it if they're going to, come and feed. You've been doing it for so long. I know every buck's a little bit different but the bucks that you've seen, especially like that those 3-year-olds and older, are they typically on a beeline directly to that tree?
A lot of times, yeah. So as far as the wind, I do like to get, of course, on the downwind side. So that's probably one of the reasons I maybe like the mornings better, because it's a little bit more predictable with the thermal sucking down into that creek or river or whatever it is. But yeah, a lot of the bucks, though, are coming in after does looking for them. I mean, that's trying to think back, probably at least half of them, there was already does feeding there. So be still. Don't be up there moving around. I sometimes don't even stand up until I know that it's a shooter buck coming. Sometimes you'll hear a deer coming, you know how it is, 150 yards. You're like, That ain't a squirrel. It's like, that's a deer, like way before you hear it. But I still just like to wait till I know that they're just shooter buck coming, because I don't want to be up there moving around if he's just observing the area.
Yeah.
That biggest one that I killed, and that was like 5 or 6 years ago, there were two fawns under the tree. And it's crazy watching these fawns. They come running into the tree almost every time. It's like it only took you. It's like, they just started learning this a week ago about feed trees, and they come running in way before the big doe's like 40 yards away still. And those little fawns come popping acorns. But yeah, there was two under me, and this one came from behind me and walked right under me, unfortunately. And I did have to shoot him at like 2 yards, because I was like, he kind of started trotting towards those fawns. I was like, he ain't getting out of here. I made a great shot. He ran 50 yards, but yeah, they're making a beeline either to the tree or to the tree because there's does there.
I'm curious too about how, now I know this is kind of a loaded question, but how long do you get out of a really good feed tree? Let's say you find one that just started dropping opening week and it's just like gravy. How long is it good for?
Yeah, you better hope you found it right when it started. 10 days maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, a week.
That's a little
to
bit
10
longer
days.
than I thought.
So like, that's the unfortunate thing about like if you're only able to go on the weekends or whatever, and you find that tree one weekend, by the next weekend it might be too late. So hunt it then, scout on your way in. That's another good thing about hunting the feed trees. You're not just hunting the same spot over and over and over again. If you're scouting and you find a fresh tree, hunt it right then. Be done with it that week.
How do you deal with that aspect of it? If you're kind of starting over every weekend, it might be a little different now because I know you own your own business.
Yeah.
Maybe you're a little more flexible, but maybe before that, when you had your day job, how would you deal with that transition of every week you're kind of starting over again?
Yeah, it's not a good thing for sure. Just we would always try to get down on Friday afternoon in time to scout and hunt, whether that meant leaving class early, leaving work early. Luckily, I was in school at Clemson at first, so leaving on the Friday afternoons, making sure that you have those 2 good hunts or 2 good days to hunt before you have to go back to work or school. But yeah, scout as much as you can and hit it then, because it doesn't last too long.
I'm curious, if you find like a hot feed tree and you don't kill something on it, you want to go back the next weekend, are you going right back to that one and checking it and you're like, oh crap, it's not any good, I got to start over again?
Yeah, most likely. Sometimes if you're running late, you just go hunt it anyway. And if it hasn't rained or anything, a lot of times it's hard to tell if that sign is still good. You need to see if it's still dropping, stand there and listen, see if there's any on the ground. If you get back and it was a great tree and there's still a few on the ground when you get back, then you know you're still good to go for another few days.
I want to run a situation by you because I've seen this, and maybe it's just because of lack of experience of like why I set up the way I did, but I've ran across this, and I've had other people when we've talked about feed trees bring this question up. A lot of people talk when it says, guys are successful hunting feed trees, finding the tree. Okay, have you ever ran into the situation where you have a cluster of trees that might be 30 to 60 yards, maybe 100 yards in length? There's maybe 5 or 6 real big white oaks, and they're all dropping. They all have really good feed sign. If you've ran across that situation, how do you go about trying to select what tree you're going to set up on? Because you can't shoot the whole thing.
Yeah, it's just usually I'm looking for that buck sign if that's the case, and the one with the best buck sign. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the one he's going to come to, but it'd kind of be like for people that are hunting food plots, like picking which one you're going to go to, knowing that there's going to be deer in every one of them every evening. It's just kind of one of those things where you just hope more sits you have that he eventually comes to the one you're at, because there's plenty of times I've hunted and seen that big buck 50 or 60 yards away, and there's just nothing you can do about it, and he's feeding on that tree. I have rattled them into feed trees later after they've left, so it's something that you can try. I've not been super successful with it in the last few years, trying to blind rattle, but if they leave, try to get them to come to the tree that you're at.
Okay. Now, also, when you're hunting feed trees like this, especially during the time of the year, because you're talking about like the rut in some of these areas, it can start happening that 3rd week of October, going all the way into early November and mid-November. Do you implement calling at all? Like outside of rattling, do you grunt? Do you like to grunt?
Not just blind, no.
Okay. But maybe if you're working a deer and he's skirting the edge of you, just try to draw him in.
Try, yeah.
Okay. And then also when we're talking about like hunting feed trees and the situations and scouting, when you find that tree, do you ever worry about yourself, like maybe because you're distracted, you're looking at different things and you happen to walk right on top of all that feed sign and like leaving ground scent? the day you're going to try to hunt it? Like, will you ever like go scout something, you find it, but you like, man, I might have buggered it up for whatever reason. I come back in here the next day or 2 days from now.
Yeah, it's a thought for sure, especially if you're hot, you're sweating, you know that there's just scent pouring off of you. And it depends on if you have your stand on your back and you're ready to get up in the tree, or if you have to, you were just scouting at noon and you're going to come back at 4 o'clock and hunt. So that's a big factor into it. If you're ready to climb up the tree, I'll just get up and hunt, because you're going to have to walk in anyway. I mean, yeah, when you go back to hunt, don't walk under the canopy of the tree. Leave as little scent under it as you can. But if it's something that is that hot of a sign, I just figure I'm going to try to shoot him before he gets to where I walk to. So
I got a very interesting question.
Okay.
At least I find it interesting. You've been doing this before like Onyx or anything like that was available. How did you go about knowing exactly how you're getting to these trees, especially in the dark when you started hunting mornings and stuff, and like not walking past the tree, missing the tree, all that kind of stuff?
I've always had a good sense of direction. We don't use like the bright eyes or anything like that. A lot of if it was like along a lake or a river or something, and you knew you were only 100 yards from there, you would kind of know where you were going to turn off of it. But I've always had a good sense of where I'm at, and just remembering the landscape I was on and being like, oh yeah, there's that tree with that split in it. I was hunting that one.
Okay.
That's pretty much it on that. So.
What is your take when you're hunting features? Say it's one of those situations that the deer, maybe you have some does, something comes to the tree, you're not interested in shooting doe. Maybe you already killed a few does and you're trying to hunt a buck. What is your exit strategy if they stay on that tree until like dark, or like when you're about to need to get down? Like how do you get out, and like just walk us through your thought process with that?
Yeah, so I mean, you sit there for 20 or 30 minutes after dark, but there's been plenty of evenings where they haven't left yet, because usually they usually don't stay for like hours at a feed tree. From what I've seen, they're coming in before dark, and shortly after that they're leaving. But if they're there, I've tried the coyote howl. I've tried that. Whether a lot of times that'll scare them away, but is that a good thing or a bad thing? Are they not coming back now because of the coyote howl? It's like, yeah, I scared them off successfully, but was that good or bad? Here's what's really cool about deer in the dark. Deer in the dark really, for the most part, don't care what you are or that you're there. I've climbed down with them 20 yards away, and they just might take a few steps off, and then when you're walking out, you shine your light, and they're just still looking at you. Same thing that actually happened in that Alabama hunt last year, except that I was coming in the morning, and the deer was already there, like bedded down 5 yards from my tree, and it just kind of stood up and just kind of moseyed off and stood there until I started climbing up. But yeah, they just don't seem super spooky. They know that they're safe. Or that they know that they got away, I guess. So they saw you climb down the tree. They went back to feeding, and I don't think that they think a whole lot about it.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I've tried the whole coyote howl too. I used to do that. God, that was probably maybe 8-10 years ago, and I used to carry like a diaphragm coyote howler, and for like hunting food plots and stuff like that. If you had like maybe you had just back then access was never a thought process. It was like, crap, I got to get out of here without bumping all these deer. And like, man, get out of the shooting house and just freaking ripping a coyote howl to like, scare them off. And, don't really know how, I mean, it would scare them off. But also I had times I did it and the deer just stood there. Like, especially does, they would just stand there and like start looking, getting curious. And I'm like, oh crap. Like now they're like right here on top of me. Like this is terrible. And like, I've done it 3 times now and they haven't moved.
Must not have been a very good howl.
I think they were like, why is that? And that was in a tree specifically. I was in a big water oak. And I'm like, they're probably like, why is that coyote 25 foot up that tree right there? Like just wondering. So, but that's interesting, because I've always wondered that too, like the exit strategy, getting out of one of those spots and like potentially bumping deer on the way out.
You can kind of reverse that in the mornings too, because a lot of times when you, and I was kind of waiting on Andrew to ask about this for the mornings, because a lot of times there's already deer there.
That's literally where I was going next.
Yeah.
And then Jacob just kept talking.
A lot of times there's deer there. I mean, you get blown at, you get whatever, because, if they smell you, they're probably going to blow. But if there's just deer there, a lot of times they'll leave. There's countless times I've killed deer after, walking in and they were already under the tree. You just slide up a tree and hope that wasn't the big buck that you were trying to kill. I don't think it has a ton of effect on it. Yeah, it's nice to have those live does there. But unless they go tearing out of there, blowing every 5 seconds, then I don't put that much stock in it too, because mid to late morning ends up being better anyway. can't recall any I've killed on a feed tree like right at daylight. It's usually, and most people are going to tell you that about any kind of hunting anyway. But yeah, that mid to late morning is usually when the bucks are cruising by, coming to come and get some food, probably right before they go lay back down.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to bring up was the early morning access. You're bumping deer, but I was going to say the same thing. I don't feel like it's as much of a big deal down here because one, there's a bunch of deer. Mm-hmm. Two, there's a lot of cover, and three, like there's probably other deer in the area that are going to end up coming there. But then also the nature of hunting a feed tree, it's not like you're hunting this spot all season. You're going to be hunting it for like 2-3 days, maybe. Like if it's a really good one and you got time, you'll be hunting it for like 3 days in a row, and then you're on to the next one. So like, what's it matter if you bump some does off of it, really?
You're hoping for different deer to come back anyway. So
yeah, as long as you're not busting Mr. Buck off of it.
What do you think that like some of the biggest mistakes are that guys make when it comes to like trying to hunt feed trees?
Yeah, probably. I would say it's just hunting the ones that are we talked about earlier, dropping and nothing's feeding on it, or hunting ones with old sign. Because I mean, most people can understand you can find a tree that's mulched up under it, but you find one that was hot last week and the deer are already kind of moving away from it. It might be, if it's not that hot tree, a couple does might come check it out and they might find one or two. Mm-hmm. But if they're not hanging out there for a long time, that buck that's searching or coming in after the does, I think a lot of times they're not necessarily searching, but they're letting the does go feed first, and they know that they can come pick up on these trees that are safe after them, because literally almost everyone's been after other deer have been to the tree. So I think that's probably the biggest mistakes is just hunting the old sign and then hunting where there's not sign. There's a lot of feed.
Yeah, and you bring up the whole thing, and you mentioned this earlier, but the whole aspect of, people hunting trees that have a lot of acorns on the ground, but there's no feed sign. Yeah. And you see that on Facebook all the time. And again, being guilty of it too, where like guys are like, "Man, I'm in this spot. There's acorns everywhere." And the funny thing is, a lot of those people are hunting around mountain chestnut oaks. Oh yeah. Which where we turkey hunted, there's a bunch of those. Yeah. And they drop that bit. They look like a water chestnut oak.
You could
a white oak.
Bang someone on the head with.
Oh, dude! When they're following the tree, you need a hard hat.
Yeah.
But very rarely we find feed sign underneath them, but some people that are like new to that kind of area where those trees are at, they find that and they're like, this is the honey hole, but they don't realize everything within 1,000 yards of them, it looks the same. Like they're all dropping
millions of them.
They're all dropping super heavy.
Sounds like someone dropping a ball bearing out of a tree.
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny when it hit. Oh my god, it's so funny when it hits like a rock or something,
or a limb, dude. It sounds like a baseball bat,
like a 22.
Yeah, I mean it's super loud.
It's like when we hunted Georgia last year. That's what we ran into. And the funny thing is, because the white oaks weren't dropping quite yet, red oaks definitely weren't dropping. There was a few white oaks every now and then you find some green acorns under, but there was some mountain oaks you would find. And the deer were actually feeding on them. You'd find some really good feed sign. We actually witnessed, some young bucks and does specifically feeding on them. So that was like the first time I've seen that. But from guys I've talked to, it's only in the situation when there's nothing else dropping. The season opens so early that's like the only option they want or they have really outside of soft mass like your muscadines and your persimmons or some kind of browse. And as soon as those whites start dropping, or maybe even red oaks, they just shift off that pattern and they're off to something else. Because I think, have you seen mountain oaks fed heavily before?
I mean, a little bit, and like from time to time. But in that spot, that was a spot where it was like a transitional area. They were eating them, and there was some pretty good feed sign there, but they weren't staying for long. Like every deer that we saw that came up and actually ate in that spot, they were there for max 5 minutes. Yeah. And then they were all coming out pretty close to dark, and then they were dropping off the hill and going down. There's like some pastures and stuff. I think they were just going and eating greens, whatever, like grass and browse around those like grown up fields and pastures. And that was just I don't know, a little snack along the way, I guess.
Yeah. Man, you said something, Andrew, kind of lit a spark. I'm trying to think. No, I kind of lost it. But with that, talking about like again mountain oaks and stuff, that is something when I've looked back hunting early season in Alabama, there's areas I've hunted that I would find that, and again, I'd set up and very rarely see a deer. But one time I sat up and I found where those mountain oaks are at, there was 3 gigantic American white oaks, and they were dropping. That, looking back at it, was a pretty good feed sign. We set up, it was me and my brother on a morning hunt. We were walking in, and I'd found it the afternoon before. I was like, dude, we're going to go hunt this spot. And this is like first year hunting public. This is like maybe 10 years ago. He sat in one tree, and we sat like 40 yards from each other. Like, oh, you sit on this tree, I'll sit on that tree, whatever. Had a big drainage ditch coming around us. And we ended up having a bachelor group of bucks come through. Had one really nice 8-point come in, actually underneath him, but he was facing the wrong direction. And he heard it walking, and he could see me, and I was like making hand signals, buck, antlers below you. And he looked down, there's a really nice buck kind of milling around, and ended up he spooked it trying to get up to get a shot. But when that buck was out, there was across the ditch from us, there were some more white oaks, and out of a pine thicket came, I think it was 3 or 4 other like nice bucks, like 2 small bucks and then one like really nice buck had come out, and they were feeding on that hillside. And then what happened was when we spooked this deer ran across the ditch. The other deer didn't know what happened. He never blew or anything. He just caught movement and just took off running. And then they all got over there, started sparring, kind of fighting a little bit and feeding around. And it kind of brings up a question that I hear from a lot of guys that hunt early season, bow season in the South, about bachelor groups in areas. Like, have you had much experience hunting, like catching bachelor groups coming in? And if so, like, was there any specific sign that they were leaving? Like, kind of going back to some of that sign that, kind of keyed you in on that?
Yeah. So the only thing for that would be it's starting to get later in the season or later into October when the white oaks are really good. So you might see some of that stuff on the red oaks. The only thing I can say is a lot of times we'll put a camera not necessarily on the tree, but if there's a scrape around. So yeah, that's the only way to really key in on that is if you've got a camera or something like that.
To know what's coming.
Know what's there, and we've had success having cameras actually. So when I was telling you about the 3 that me and my buddy killed, like basically I killed one, he killed one, and then I killed another like within a week and a half of each other. We had a camera down there, and after he killed his buck, we got the camera, drove all the way home. It was 2 hours home, checked the camera, and I was like, well, I know where I need to be in the morning. I had to drive all the way back down there because we thought we'd killed them all. This was an area, and this kind of goes back to the question you asked me about if there's a few white oaks like 40, 50 yards apart. A lot of times the best way is just to tag team that. We could almost see each other. We're probably 150 yards apart, but like when you get in the tree, you kind of see little spots. Where we killed those bucks, we could almost see each other when we climbed in the tree. So 150 yards or so in a heavy canopy. So that's your best option for that.
How high do you like to climb when you're hunting features?
I like to be at least 30 feet. I know a lot of people hate that. I like to be 30, 35, 40 feet. And so you ready to get a little bit technical?
Just do it.
Or entertain my technical, what I have to say about this. So, all right. So imagine and I'm not using this as an excuse. I like to be high enough so where they don't see movement and hope that my scent is blowing away instead of being right there on the ground all afternoon or morning. All right, so if you're standing on the ground and here's the deer broadside, and you were to shoot your bow at it, that deer's going to drop. So it's going to drop perpendicular to your arrow in your frame of reference. Well, if you're up here, the higher you are, now let's exaggerate that. Let's get directly on top of the deer. Not that anyone needs to be shooting a deer directly under him, because I've done it plenty of times and it doesn't work out well. If that deer drops, where is it dropping in your frame of reference for it?
I mean, just straight
down. So it's not like its vitals are moving in the way your arrow. So the higher you are, people talk about that shot angle and having less to shoot at, but you also have less that deer is moving out of the plane or the vector that your arrow is. So that's one way I look at it. Maybe I'm just trying to justify being higher in the tree.
It's that engineer talk.
But I don't. That's what I'm just trying to use that as saying. I don't see it as a disadvantage to have a steep shot angle, aside from being right above them to where you can't hit them in both lungs because they're out of plane of each other.
Well, we met a listener. Funny you said that about that shot plane. Yeah, it's like it's a smaller diameter, kind of like what you're trying to put the arrow through. But if that deer shifts, I kind of see what you're saying. Yep. He's shooting. He had a video. He's one sticking. Okay, climbing 80 feet up.
Yeah.
Bow hunting, and he had video of him shooting deer doing that. And at first, I thought he was I thought he was lying, whatever. And he showed a video hunting like pines. Now he's just hunting pines. There's no feed trees, catching bucks coming through. These big pines. And he's shooting down, and it is like, and he's shooting a heavy arrow, really heavy, super sharp fixed blade, and he's just burying that thing through their shoulders, and just, pinning that deer. The deer, runs 90 yards and just tips over. But he was like specifically he climbed that high so he could shoot down through gaps in the canopy because he'd be like out in these big longleaf pine savannas where there's other like smaller like 20-foot pine trees around.
There's like
him.
a secondary canopy.
Yeah, it's like,
almost.
and he's getting up above that in these giant longleafs climbing. I mean, up to the canopy, like where these first big limbs are, 70, 80 feet up, and just shooting straight down through these holes in the like the 20-foot pines. That if you were 30 feet up, you'd just be looking into a bunch of pines. You can't see anything. But when he get up real high, he filmed and he showed like what it looked like up there and shooting down. I'm like, that's crazy. But also, I'm just thinking like the lag time of that arrow coming from 80 feet
you're
up.
right.
Even if that deer's at 30, 40 yards, the lag time it's got to take to get there. I don't care how fast your arrows.
Yeah.
Get a heavy arrow, gravity's working for you. Shooting down like that. But I'm like, that's insane, man. So I'm interested, by the way, to see what kind of comments we get, about that. Talking about get a little higher,
Well,
kind of shooting down on them.
And I think the actual main reason though is so when you're hunting a feed tree, you're not just hunting a deer that's walking by. You're not hunting a deer that you're going to see for 15 seconds. You're not hunting a rutting buck that's chasing a doe that you're going to see for 15 seconds. The deer, there's going to be most likely you're going to see some does before that big buck comes in, and they might hang out for an hour. I don't really want to be where they can just look up and see me for an hour. There's a lot of time that you just want to be still, let them feed around without knowing you're there.
Okay.
And that's really the main reason. Aside from the the scent and all that. But,
That was one of my problems when we started going to lock-on setups. You get 4 sticks high, when it was easier to carry than a climber and you could get in weirder trees, but you get 4 sticks high and you're like 18 feet and you're just so exposed that you can sit there and be as still as you want, but if they're around you for an hour, eventually one of them is probably going to notice you.
By the way, what other points are like important? I don't know what other notes you have written down specifically on this topic, but I am interested in seeing like what are we missing when it comes to the strategy going to feed tree hunting and what people should be planning for before season gets here for that.
Yeah, so I mean the thing is you can go start identifying the areas with some someone that's never done it before, doesn't have an inventory of places. You can go start looking for areas that just have a higher density of white oaks because it's going to be your best starting point. On years that and you can already start now knowing if there's going to be a lot of acorns for this year, then you might want to avoid those areas that have a lot of white oaks first. Start on the areas that just have a few scattered if you know it's a year that's got a lot. A year that doesn't have a lot, you might want to start on the areas that has more trees to give you more options. So that'd be a good starting point for someone that's never hunted them before. But make sure that if you're in the southeast, you're in the woods, middle of October, late October, looking, listening, just try to find those trees, give them some sits, and you should have some success there.
Yeah.
A lot of times, like I said, it takes a few sits to see. Maybe go in the woods and decide that you're going to shoot a doe. Get some practice hunting the feed trees, knowing what to do, but pay attention and realize they're going to hang out for a while. Take your time, make a good shot.
Okay.
This is my last question. I'm real curious about this. So you start hunting them early season. How I asked about how long a feed tree lasts, but how long in general are you hunting feed trees for? Is it an all season long thing and you're cycling into water oaks later in the season or red oaks or something like that, or is there a time where it kind of phases out and you're on to something else?
Yeah, it phases out. It revolves around the white oak drop. If I find a tree later in the season, a water oak or something like that, then that's great. But as far as how long you're hardcore feed tree hunting, is probably a month.
Okay.
So maybe middle or late September is really when it gets started good to late October. You can find some trees early September, but they really start cranking it up middle of September through the end of October. So I guess 6 weeks maybe.
Okay, so you're like, after that, you're more just opportunistic. Like if you happen to run across a hot tree, but you're not like burning boot leather looking for them.
No, I'm not personally, just because they're just so hard to find that late. There's not going to be any white oaks dropping that late, and it's going to be just some few water oaks that the deer necessarily might not be keying in on. You might come across a hot one, but
what do you transition to?
just hunting browse and rut funnels and stuff like that. So it's
okay.
Being where you can see.
I could go down a rabbit hole in the browse thing. Like, what kind of browse? I'm
like privet head, stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah. Greenbrier.
And we actually have some privileged land now, so we have some food plots. And
got some privileged land. Nice.
Which typically I never had. So it's nice on like December 4th where you're like, we'll just go sit on the food plot this evening and see what happens. And usually it's 10, 15 does, a couple small bucks.
Not too shabby, man.
That sounds nice. Having that.
Hey, you mentioned where we turkey hunted all those mountain oaks. Did you ever go back and get that camera?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, he did not. Oh my gosh, dude! I got you on camera walking, dude. That you walk back there, you know how terrible it is. And now it's 100 degrees, and the rattlesnakes are out, and we got to go get it.
Yeah,
I ought to just make him go get it. I shouldn't even
just
go.
leave it.
Well, because I want to put it somewhere else. Because that's a nice camera. Hey, the battery life on that camera, exceptional. It sent me 2 pictures yesterday. By the way, it's been there since December.
What was it a picture of?
Does. 2 does walking around.
Little velvet nubbin bucks coming through.
Dude. Anyways, you got anything else, Jacob?
Nah, I do, and I can't wait for the time you go back in there and grab that camera, though.
Man, I'm not gonna put. I'm gonna kick you off the account so you can't see what's on it. It's just gonna be my camera. It's terrible.
I guess all like you were asking. I don't have anything crazy. It's just be consistent, climb high, find good feed sun, but just understand it might take some sits to kind of figure out where those. If you're just targeting a big mature buck, it's going to take a lot of passing up before he's the one that's there, because every deer loves to come eat the white oaks. So, but it's just a good way to spend some time in the woods, and I love hearing them drop.
Oh yeah,
Heck yeah, man.
bring your hard hat.
Yeah.
Awesome. Appreciate everybody listening to this podcast and watching this podcast. We're about to wrap up here and go attend the Mo Hunters Expo, which we're going to be a couple minutes late for, but it's okay.
About an hour late, fashionably late.
Not really. It just opened 3:30.
Well, but after we pack everything up and drive over there.
I know. Anyways.
So if you're at the expo today early, you're probably seeing Michael Pike and wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Shane
you're like,
Parker,
where are
Just
they?
standing there in the booth.
Alan Summerford, Kyle Libar, the whole 9 yards. But yeah,
They're
anyways.
holding it down for us.
Absolutely. So appreciate you guys watching this podcast. Appreciate y'all listening to this podcast. Go try some feature tactics this season. Love to try to get some listener success stories from you guys. Y'all go out there and implement what Greg said. Go kill some buck. Go kill some does. It don't matter.
Go kill some does. Yeah.
Yeah, go kill some
You got to
does.
do that. You got to kill some does before you're.
Yes, sir.
Get seasoned up. But anyways, just keep us posted how y'all season go when y'all implement some feed tree tactics. But we'll catch you back here on I guess it'll be this Thursday's episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast, breaking this down and some more listener success stories. So thank y'all for watching. Thank y'all for listening, and we'll catch you back on the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.